Hello, everybody. Now I have a very honorable guest. Meet again with Muhammad Maruf. And let me introduce our guest first, Mr. Daniel Kovalik. Yeah, is it right? Daniel,
That's
Mr.
right.
Daniel.
Yeah.
Okay, how are you, Mr. Daniel?
Good, Mohammed. Very good to be with you. Very good to be with you in Indonesia there. I
Okay, Miss,
studied a lot about Indonesia and yeah.
have you been in Indonesia?
No, I've never been, but I've studied a lot about the repression in the 60s and the US support for the massacres in the 60s that killed about 500,000 at least left-wing people and
Okay, okay, okay. Later we talk about that.
yeah.
Okay. Uh,
Okay.
Dear guest, I
Okay.
want first introduce Mr. Daniel Kovalik because seem like Indonesian have to know who's this guy. Okay, Professor Daniel Kovalik is a professor international of human rights at the University of Pittsburgh School of Law. Uh, he have been writing since at the college and haven't never stopped. Yeah, and if you check on
Yeah.
website, I think you have
Yeah, I've been
or
writing
five
since
books, right?
I was 19. Yeah.
Here we are. The plot to Space Good
Seven.
Russia.
Seven books.
Seven book. The plot to control the world. The plot overthrow Venezuela. No more war. A plot to attack Iran. Cancel this book, and other. Hello.
Yes.
Seven book.
Yes, I
Yeah.
have a new book out. Yeah, a new book on Nicaragua just came out.
Ah, just came out. Okay, seem like your book is about a war, yeah? It's about war, international politics, about America, about the superpower. Okay, tell me about your books, please.
Yeah, they're about all those things about US imperialism. They're a critique of US imperialism. I would say that if people have read Noam Chomsky, that I would say he's been kind of a mentor of me and Michael
Mm.
Parente as well. Though I think I'm more left wing than Noam Chomsky. Probably Michael Parente's more my North Star on this stuff. I've been writing since I went to Nicaragua in 1987. I became very critical of U.S. foreign policy.
Mm.
And yes, the U.S. attempt to overthrow governments around the world, to impose its will around the world, and that's what my books are about. And it's a critique of that.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, I think if we are talking about Noam Chomsky is very, very familiar all over the world, including Indonesian audience. Yeah, Noam Chomsky is a
Right.
linguist, and focusing on politics. So tell me about why you are interested in the way Noam Chomsky thinking.
Well, because he, like me, is an American, but he early on decided that the U.S. was playing a very negative and violent role in the world. And he has written many, many books and articles critiquing that. And really showing how also the U.S. manipulates its own public to advance its war aims around the world. I think most Americans don't understand what the U.S. is doing in the world. They have no concept of the havoc the U.S. has wreaked around the world. And like Chomsky, I try to expose that. My goal is to convince the American people that what we're doing is wrong and we need to change it. We're ostensibly a democratic country, though I think our democracy is quite flawed. It's really been taken over by moneyed interests but still we have a certain level of democracy, and the people of America have to be accountable for what the US is doing around the world. So that's why I write what I write. That's why Chomsky's important to me, because that's what he does, and it's a lonely, difficult road because people don't want to believe these things. And what are these things? I'll just give some examples. I mean, in some examples, people in Indonesia may or may not know about. For example, in the 1990s, the Clinton administration supported Rwanda and Uganda and other countries to invade the Congo, Democratic Republic of Congo, and about 6 million people were killed, 6 to 8 million. Now, that's not something Americans know anything about. They don't know about the Congo or about that intervention. And again, I was mentioning at the outset, they don't know in the mid-1960s that the U.S. supported they supported a coup in Indonesia that brought to power a right-wing military government that killed, again, at least 500,000 leftists. And then the U.S. supported, of course, the invasion of East Timor, which killed, I think, about 200,000 people out of a very small population. That's something that Chomsky's written a lot about. And again, these are things Americans have no idea about. They probably can't even pick Indonesia out on the map. And so it's important to educate the public about this because,
Okay, Mr. Daniel, it's very interesting. Like you are same with Mr. Chomsky. You are in U.S. citizens, U.S. citizens,
yes,
and you are very, very critical to your government, and you know that the United States promoting democracy, but in the same time doing many intervention. That's what we call it paradox, two-faced, double standard, and we know about it. So, do you think that your thinking, you criticize is effective because you know that United States is whatever you are criticize to your government is no outcome at all. Tell me about it.
Well, it's a great question, and actually it's a very timely question because I ask myself that every day. And I've been asking myself that recently. I don't know that I'll have to let other people judge. I don't know how impactful I am. I try to be, but it's very hard to cut through the propaganda. So probably how effective I am is something that I struggle with. I don't know. All I know is that I'm on the right track. My critiques are correct. And I think what I'm doing is correct and morally sound. And that's all I can be responsible for. How impactful I am isn't totally up to me, but I try very hard to be impactful. I write books, I write articles. I'm very active on social media trying to raise these issues. I do everything I can to do that. But I think, to be impactful in this country, which is a huge country, it's got about 330 million people, more or less. I think Indonesia's, right behind it. I think Indonesia has the 4th largest population in the world, if I'm not mistaken, which surprised me when I learned that. Honestly, that's an amazing thing. But it's a vast country, the United States, and to be able to impact the discourse is difficult.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, before we are talking about the American policy, I want to talk about more theoretically, because we know that if we open the books, social science, the United States, England and France is the master of social science, is it right? So if we can that send article like journal to be published in especially in academia of United States, so our intellectual will be in the same level. At least admit it. But in the same time, you know that if we are talking about the legitimacy, any kind of regime which is right or wrong need a legitimacy. Like the British did intervention so many years. United States as the follower did intervention. Okay, but they need legitimacy to do it. Okay, they need
Right.
legitimacy. They are
Right.
talking about the promoting democracy, but in the same time, there are soldiers all over the world. They put step in all over the world. What do you think about that?
Yeah, no, I think that it is a great hypocrisy, and I honestly don't think the U.S. and Britain promote democracy. I think that's a big lie. When you look at the regimes they put in place, like the Pinochet regime in Chile, which was fascist, right? The Britain and the U.S. also colluded after World War II to reinstate fascism in Greece, right? Those are just two examples. In Indonesia as well, in the 60s, they helped put in place right-wing government, and they helped put in place, of course, the right-wing government in Ukraine. So when you really look at what the U.S. and UK do, what they do has nothing to do with democracy. What it has to do with is putting people in power who protect their economic interests, protect the economic interest of Great Britain and the United States, right? And they call that democracy, whether those leaders are democratic or not. I mentioned the Congo. That was another place where they, the U.S. and Belgium colluded to murder the democratically elected Prime Minister Patrice Lumumba, supported for many years the brutal dictator Mobutu Sese Seko in what became Zaire. Again, nothing to do with democracy and everything to do with supporting governments, many times, dictatorial governments, to protect economic interest of the West. And that's the truth, and that's the reality. We dress it up by saying we support democracy, but again, there's no evidence of that, right? Another example is Vietnam, where you had Ho Chi Minh, who actually invoked the Declaration of Independence and invoked Jeffersonian democracy and thought the U.S. would support him in ridding Vietnam of the French colonialists after World War II, right? Because he said, hey, you guys are democratic and you have this great Declaration of Independence and this great Constitution. So, hey, of course, and you got rid of your British colonial rulers, so you're going to help me, right? You'll support me, get rid of the French. And of course, that didn't happen. The U.S. instead supported the French against Ho Chi Minh and the Viet Minh. And then when the French were unable to defend their interests there at all, the U.S. stepped in and, of course, engaged in some of the most brutal warfare we've ever seen, killing 3 to 4 million Vietnamese in order to prevent Vietnamese independence. So there's no truth to this claim that the U.S. supports democracy. And as I mentioned, I mean, the U.S. itself is barely democratic itself. In fact, one example of this is recent polls show that most Americans think that Joe Biden and Trump are not fit to hold office.
Okay, Mr. Daniel.
Those will probably be our two choices. Yeah.
Okay, let us talk about you're expert in law, is it right? So it seems like United States use law, as a tool to legitimize whatever they want, especially for foreign policy. So, in your perspective, how the United States using international law to legitimacy they're doing? their policy.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I would say what they've more done is apply international law against other countries, right? So, for example, they support the International Criminal Court prosecuting, going after certain leaders that the U.S. wants to overthrow. For example, Muammar Gaddafi in Libya was an example of that, or Slobodan Milosevic in Serbia. Now they're, of course, supporting the ICC trying to prosecute Vladimir Putin. That is an attempt to use international law against him. But meanwhile, the U.S. itself is not a party to the Rome Statute, international criminal ability to prosecute America. He passed a law under George W. Bush, which is colloquially known as the Invasion of the Hague Act, which says that if the ICC does try to prosecute Americans, the U.S. has the right to invade the Hague. So what the U.S. does is it uses international law against other countries, but it really reserves the right to be utterly immune from international law. So another example of this is that it has lost cases to countries like Nicaragua before the International Court of Justice. And when it loses a case like that, it just ignores it. It just says, okay, well, we just won't recognize your jurisdiction and we won't recognize your decision. So we won't pay Nicaragua the money we owe them. Iran recently won a case against the U.S. before the International Court of Justice, challenging some of the sanctions the U.S. has imposed on Iran. And again, so what did the U.S. say? They just said, okay, well, we don't recognize the general jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice anymore. But we might use it against someone else, but we're not going to recognize it if they try to use it against us. I mean, this is a totally preposterous way to use the law. I mean, if the law doesn't apply to everyone,
so
and
do
it doesn't apply to the weak, yeah.
So do you
To
think
the
that,
strong as much as the weak, it's no law. That's not law. Yeah.
do you think that ICC is a part of the problem itself, or is, you know, that it's depend on the who is the handle the United Nations?
Yeah, I mean, I do think at the moment it's part of the problem, again, because it does not, it selectively prosecutes, and it mostly prosecutes poor countries, leaders from poor countries. At this point, they've only successfully prosecuted Africans, right? And they can't or won't go after the United States. And so, again, to me, if that's the case, then it shouldn't do anything. I mean, and that was the position of Miguel de Soto, the Nicaraguan. He had been the foreign minister under the Sandinista government. He later became the president of the United Nations General Assembly. And his position, which I agree with, is, again, if the ICC can't or won't prosecute all, people from all countries equally, then it shouldn't operate at all. I mean, that's just not fair. That's not law. That's something else, right? And I agree with that. So yeah, I do see the ICC right now is more of a problem than it is a good thing. It's just used as a hammer by the Western countries against their adversaries.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, it seems like very upset, yeah, because if we think about the bond, yeah, the emergence of the United Nations since War I and World War II, seem like the superpower, yeah, the British, the United States, the France, the German, the USSR, to handle the chaos. Okay, the main idea of the United Nations was birthed is because to solve the chaos. Okay, and it's need instrument. So like ICC, any kind of instrument, international, is to solve, maintain that should not to be chaos anymore. Like you know that Hiroshima Nagasaki was bombed, yeah, by nuclear. So do you think a United Nations should be criticized, whatever, because in the history our president Sukarno have ever pulled out from as a member of United Nation because of unfair, because of unfair to due to the what I say international sport. They didn't put China to be a member of international sport, something like that. So this idea is long. So if we're talking about United Nations again, do you think it's need to be reformed or to be, I don't know how to speak about it. So please, your comment.
Yes, it needs to be reformed at least, and there's some suggestions that some international scholars are making. One, they think that the Security Council should be expanded, should have more members and more members with vetoes beyond the countries that have it now, which is only 5 different countries, and maybe to water down the veto power, to require, again, have a bigger Security Council with more members that have veto power, and then to require more than one veto to in order to effectively put down a resolution, right? That right now it just doesn't work because the major powers are able to veto things, and it has created essentially a stasis where the Security Council is just completely ineffective to maintain international peace and security, which is their main task. And again, it's a relic of World War II. They gave the seats to the permanent members were given their seats based on the fact that they were the victors in World War II. And even that's not totally true because France, I don't think, should be counted amongst that. For most of the war, France was collaborating with Nazi Germany. But in any case, it's a relic of the past. Countries like South Africa should be on it now. Brazil, India, these are becoming major powers and important powers, and maybe Indonesia too. There's no reason why just the victors from World War II should be have this veto power. So I think that is one way to deal with it. I think the other way is maybe to give more power to the General Assembly too. The General Assembly tends to vote, at least in my mind, tends to vote in a very positive fashion on issues like apartheid, South African apartheid when it existed, and now Israeli apartheid. I mean, they tend to vote against those things, tend to vote against the blockade against Cuba, for example, but they have no power at all. So I think they should be given more power. All these, these two different reforms could make a big difference in creating a more effective and fair international body, I think.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, if we are talking about more theoretically between law and the democracy, so since the beginning, the United Nations is birthed by contradict of the democracy itself, because seem like not treating equal to the as a member, all of the member. They are treating unjust, unequal. Yeah, they put it. That the legitimacy is in a point of the by force, not by voluntary. Okay, like Indonesia. Who's Indonesia? Vietnam. Who's Vietnam? But if we are talking about the French, the German, they are so superpower because of the military power, not because of
Correct.
that the way they thinking, accepting a good idea. It is the best way to put as all of member of United Nations as equal as like the spirit of human right, that. So it seems like contradict with the democracy itself. Do you think?
Yes, I agree. I agree. And absolutely. I mean, when you look at the UN Charter, it says that all countries are equal. You know, each country is to be treated as an
Mm,
equal sovereign country. I mean, under the way the UN Charter is written, a tiny country, you know, like Micronesia, should be treated as equally as the United States. That's the whole purpose behind the UN Charter. And yet, the way the UN set up with the Security Council, that it doesn't treat countries like that, right? It's like the book Animal Farm by George Orwell. Every country's equal, but some countries are more equal than others. And in this case, right, the U.S. and the countries that have veto power in the Security Council, obviously they're treated to have more power than every other country. So in that sense, the UN Charter is by its own terms kind of a bunch of contradictions.
mm,
And you mentioned that, you know, what ends up happening is countries end up being able to do what they do because they have more military power than others,
mm.
right? And so the law doesn't protect the weak against the strong. And also because they may have more economic power, although most of that economic power is illegitimate because, of course, the Western powers have a lot of their economic power from the fact that they have just looted the developing world. You know, I saw a very interesting thing about France, for example. France has no gold mines,
Mm.
okay? None in its own country. And yet it has massive reserves. The country of Mali has many gold mines and has no gold reserves because they're all in France. Yeah, the French have all their
That's
gold. That's
that's
the way the world works.
mm. So the way thinking, yeah, if we are talking about the
And you
way,
can see that. Yeah.
yes, if we are talking about the way thinking, so it seems like you know that we are very sad as a Asian. You know that China has a security council as a member security council. Is that right? So what happened with Indonesia? What happened with Vietnam? Yeah,
Yeah.
just just
Well,
just
that's
they
the
put it.
question.
China have a security council. Others no security council. That's a problem.
Yeah, no, it's
And
not fair. It's not
and
fair.
and I
Yeah,
think
and again,
China and I
yeah.
think China and Russia now enjoy this comfortable, you know, that right. Do you think so? China and Russia.
Yeah, I'm sure. No, I'm sure they're very happy with that. Now and again, and I admire China in many ways, but I do understand Indonesia and Vietnam and other countries have issues with China. And
Mm,
but it's all a, as I said, a relic of World War II. It all had to do with World War II.
mm.
And so, although Vietnam, under that category, Vietnam deserves to be on the Security Council because, you know, Ho Chi Minh and his forces helped the Allies in World War II, right? But
Yes.
again, uh, it's all divided up based on, again, something far in the past. It makes no sense anymore the way the Security Council is structured. And I
Yes.
agree with you. Why isn't Vietnam on it? Why isn't Indonesia on it? Why isn't India on it?
Mm,
As we know, most countries that exist now in the world did not exist at the time the UN Charter was agreed to because they were colonies, right? Then
mm.
you had this massive, you know, decolonization in which all these new countries were given birth to, but that isn't fairly represented in the UN, right? It's certainly not in the Security Council. So we have to deal with that. We have to deal with the new world.
Yeah,
Um,
Mr. Daniel, seem like every country now think like the future of the destiny of any kind of nation, yeah, depend on the Security Council. So who's the country close to the country has a Security Council, yeah, close to the Russia, close to the China, close to the United States, close to the France. If you are not close enough, so stay away from the conflict, stay away from the war, because the war is not seem like the nature, because the war is like the game. They can make it the war in any kind of country, and they can finish as quick as possible they want, because they control everything. Do you think so?
Yes. Yeah, of course. Of course, that's a fact, you know. I mean, look at poor Libya in 2011. The Security Council voted to allow NATO to destroy that country. I mean, well, Russia and China would say that's not true. They didn't think that was going to happen, but I think they should have known that was going to happen. And that's what happened. And Libya had no voice to speak up. No one spoke for them to defend their right to even exist, really. And we see that over and over. So those are tragedies that have happened because, again, of a Security Council that doesn't truly represent the rest of the world, you know.
Okay, Mr. Daniel, we continue to the another segment. I have a good issue about the Security Council and special for Ukraine war, but in other segment. So we close this segment and then we continue to another segment. Thank you very much, Mr. Daniel.
Thank you. I enjoyed it, Mom, and I'm glad to meet you someday. I hope I can visit you in Indonesia. Thank you.
Okay.